Assalamu alaikum everybody. Welcome to your 11th online lecture. Today we are going to discuss blood products, transfusion and intravenous fluids therapy. So what is the aim of blood transfusion? Primarily the aim is to replace circulating blood volume in cases where there is acute blood loss. So basically objective number one is to replace the lost blood or volume. And the second objective is to ensure adequate oxygen delivery to the peripheral tissues. As you know, the red blood cells in the blood are responsible for carrying the oxygen, and when there is loss of hemoglobin, it may be related to total blood volume loss, or it may be related to simple iron deficiency or RBC's inefficiency or RBC loss. So, decreased production. So, one purpose of blood transfusion would be replacement of volume and replacement of hemoglobin. That would be the second objective. So, what are the indications of blood transfusion? First indication, as we just discussed, is acute blood loss. Acute blood loss means sudden rapid blood loss. This usually occurs in trauma, injuries, roadside accidents where there is massive bleeding. Then bleeding can occur in an immediate post-operative period or relatively delayed secondary hemorrhage, fifth to seventh day, or acute blood loss can occur in, as for example, in esophageal varices, in bleeding hemorrhoids, in GIT malignancies. And then you can have acute blood loss in ladies from the uterus, whether it is because of some fibroids, malignancy, or simple dysfunctional uterine bleeding. So the primary objective one would be acute blood loss, and we are talking here replacement of volume. Then during surgery, either you know that this surgery there is going to be blood loss, or you know that the organ that you are removing or a part of the organ that you are excising is full of blood, and therefore you may start with the transfusion during surgery preemptively, knowing fully well that this patient is going to bleed. For example, in aortic surgery, cardiac surgery, preemptive blood transfusions are started. And then during surgery, intentionally or unintentionally, if the patient has lost blood, then you start replacement during surgery. Again, we are talking of volume replacement here. Then in case of burns, because of there are two different types of problems. One, evaporation of the body water from the burnt surface because the body is no more waterproof. And two, there is hemolysis going on in the blood, and that is leading to loss of hemoglobin. So volume and hemoglobin both have to be replaced. Uh, it can be replaced with blood only, or usually the volume is replaced with fluids and the hemoglobin is replaced with blood products. Then there is anemia correction. In anemia, the problem is loss of hemoglobin. So this anemia may need to be corrected in the peri-operative period because you are preparing the patient for some surgery. Then there are chronic anemias which may be iron deficiency or thalassemia or that sort of thing. So anemia correction is primarily hemoglobin quantity replacement. And pre-operative, patient presents with anemia, and preemptively you first transfuse the patient, build up the patient, bring the hemoglobin up to acceptable levels, and then go for surgery. Uh, then there are specific cases where there are clotting factors deficiency, and in that case you may need to give preemptively, preoperatively, or peroperatively. Also post-operatively you may need to give specific clotting factors or specific concentrated plasma concentrates which replace the deficient clotting factors. So what are the transfusion triggers? Uh, in patients who are stable, who are not bleeding, they are not symptomatic, they are not about to undergo major surgery, they have had low hemoglobin for a long period of time, and they have adapted to this situation, then even 6 grams per deciliter of hemoglobin does not indicate blood transfusion. It does indicate that you need to build up the patient, but usually iron products, whether given orally or whether given IV, will permit the patient to slowly build up the hemoglobin over the next 1 to 3 months. In such cases, transfusion is not required. However, patients who have cardiovascular disease, are in sepsis, or have had traumatic brain injury, in such patients, oxygen carrying capacity of the blood needs to be optimum, and such patients cannot tolerate hypoxemia. So, in such cases, this criteria of 6 grams becomes inadequate, and you always want these patients to be above 10 grams per deciliter. There are different consensus. Some people would say that hemoglobin of 8 is acceptable for surgery. This may be acceptable for a cesarean section where the body has been prepared over the 9 months for with fluid retention and increased blood volume. So the hemoglobin is diluted. However, in an average setting, in an average patient, hemoglobin of at least 10 grams per deciliter is desired, especially in surgeries where you may be expecting some blood loss. In very small, straightforward, clean surgeries, 8 may be acceptable. For a major operation, uh, 10 grams would be the minimum for anesthesia safety and to prevent any morbidity or complications in the post-operative period. Generally, in such patients, uh, preemptively blood transfusion is not given uh, and only given after the operation to replace the blood loss during the procedure. Then we come to massive blood transfusion. What is massive blood transfusion? It is the complete replacement of entire blood volume within a 24 hours period. So, as we know, the average blood volume in a person is around 5 liters. So, if you have replaced or transfused 5 or more liters of blood within a 24-hour period, then that is called massive blood transfusion. And massive blood transfusion and then carries its own risks with it. And for example, the amount of anticoagulant in each bag is around 75 ml, and when you have replaced, yani, you've given around 10 bags of blood to replace 5 liters. You've given a lot of anticoagulant to the patient, and the patient's clotting capacity will be compromised. That is why when you are giving multiple transfusions in rapid succession, it is recommended that after every 2 uh, bags of blood, you must give at least 10 cc of calcium gluconate or calcium sandoz to counteract the anticoagulant in the body, because the anticoagulant consumes the calcium. Then there are other problems, as we will study further forwards in as we study the blood products. There are problems related to minor blood antigens. Then there are problems related to proteins and antibodies present in the serum, plasma, and all of those with a one transfusion or two blood bag transfusions, the patient's hosts, the host blood can accommodate and adapt to those harmful things. But when the patient's entire blood is replaced by exogenous blood, then these factors become important. So, what is the preparation for a blood transfusion? This encompasses these four steps: collection of the blood, grouping, then cross matching of the blood, and then the preparation required for actually giving the blood transfusion. We will discuss each of these. So, for the collection step, fresh whole blood is rich in coagulation factors, and these are metabolically active if the blood is fresh. Stored blood does contain hemoglobin, but the platelets and clotting factors, they keep on degrading. The half-life of stored platelets is around 5 days. So, and the clotting factors are also diminished, depleted within the first 7 to 10 days. So, after that, the blood is only good for hemoglobin and volume replacement. It is not. It does not contain any active advantage in cases where coagulation factors are required. One donor, healthy donor, is only allowed to donate blood for a maximum of 3 times a year, because it does take 2 to 3 months to build up enough hemoglobin to replace the donation that you've given previously. One important point of collection of blood is that HIV, AIDS virus, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C need to be excluded. The donor is first tested, and if he is negative for these transmissible infections in his blood, only then the donor blood is collected. The bag of blood is approximately 450 ml, and anticoagulant in that bag is about 75 ml. Commonly, the anticoagulant used nowadays is SAGM solution, and this consists of saline, adenine, glucose, and mannitol. The blood is stored at around 4 degrees centigrade. So please remember that whenever you will get blood from the lab, it will be cold, and it is not immediately fit for transfusion. It needs to be warmed up. Shelf life of blood is generally 5 weeks. Preferably, good blood banks try to recycle their stored blood within 3 weeks of donation, but it can be, under circumstances, used up to 5 weeks to replace volume and hemoglobin. Once you've collected tested the donor blood for transmissible infections, then you check the blood group. The antigens in the blood group are located on the RBCs, and the primary antigens are ABO system and the RH system, rhesus system. There are other minor antigens also, which do become significant in case of massive blood transfusions, but in case of a single transfusion or two transfusions, the main antigens that are important are ABO and RH. ABO system is strongly antigenic and it is associated with naturally occurring antibodies in the serum. And there are three basic genes A, B, and O. That is why it is called ABO system. A and B genes are generally expressed, and O gene is not expressed, it is recessive. Antibodies are present in the serum against those antigens which are lacking in the blood. We will see further that each group has antibodies and antigens, and uh, antibodies against other blood groups are present in those blood groups which you check. There are four phenotypes: O, A, B, and AB. When a patient is phenotype O, the antigen contained in the blood is O, and antibodies contained in blood are anti-A and anti-B. In A phenotype, the antigen is A and the antibodies are anti-B. In B blood group, the antigen is B and antibodies are anti-A. Where both A and B antigens are present, there can be no antibodies, of course, otherwise they would react with the patient's own blood. RH system, you must have noted that whenever the patient is blood group in a patient is checked, it says A positive or B negative or B positive. This positive negative is RH positive, RH present, RH negative, RH antigen not present. So this is also a strongly antigenic group. Uh, Here you have to remember that there are no naturally occurring antibodies to D antigen or Rh antigen in any patient. These antibodies are only acquired in an Rh negative mother who is pregnant with an Rh positive fetus. During delivery and placental separation, the patient's Rh positive blood enters the sinuses in the uterus. The mother is Rh negative, but now that Rh positive blood has entered the patient's bloodstream, now the mother will develop Rh antibodies. In subsequent pregnancies, these Rh antibodies will now react. They will cross the placenta and they will cross into the fetus. And if the fetus is Rh positive, now the mother's blood contains Rh antibodies against the Rh. So these antibodies will react with the Rh positive fetus, and they will cause hemolysis in the fetus blood, and usually results in abortion of that pregnancy usually does not survive. Therefore, you will study in gynecology that whenever you have a um, pregnant lady whose blood group is negative, Rh negative, in such patients immediately after delivery or cesarean, the blood group of the baby is checked. If the baby is Rh positive, meaning thereby that positive antigens came either from the husband of the lady, or the lady was carrying a recessive allele in her own blood group. So, in such patients where the mother is Rh negative and you've checked the blood group of the baby and the baby is positive, in such patients, immediately the mother is injected within the first 24 to 48 hours, preferably within the first 24 hours, with immunoglobulins to destroy the Rh positive antibodies which have gone into the mother, so that in the next pregnancy, before the mother will not be harboring any antibodies to Rh positive fetus. So once you've checked the blood group and you've checked the Rh group, then you've checked the for transmissible infections. Now the blood can be obtained from the donor, and cross matching means direct matching of the donor cells with the recipient serum. The recipient blood and the donor's blood are allowed to cross react in the lab, and the process generally requires an hour. And essentially, it um, excludes lab errors where ABO, main blood groups ABO and RH uh, blood group checking has been faulty in the case of donor or recipient. However, the chances for this are very less, but still it can occur, human error. But the actual objective of cross matching is to see if there are any other minor groups which we are not checking, antigens and antibodies in the blood, which only become apparent when the two types of blood are allowed to react with each other. Uh, Therefore, other minor groups are not individually checked, but they are excluded uh, by cross matching. So the universal donor is blood group O because it is not containing any antigens which may react with the patient. This is a recessive and suppressed gene. And universal recipients are blood group AB uh, because they don't contain any antibodies to any other blood group. So they can receive any blood, any group of blood, and O blood group can donate to any other blood. O negative would probably be the actual universal donor. O positive may then have reaction with the uh, other group. Preparation for giving blood. These are important for you from practical point of view. So now that you have the blood in your hand, you've asked for blood from the lab, and now you're going to transfuse the blood to your patient. First, you have to check the label for the blood group and then tally it with the blood group of the recipient. Then you have to confirm that a cross match between these two bloods directly between the donor blood and this specific recipient has been done, and you check the patient's name against the patient whose blood was cross matched with the donor blood. So a doctor has to, this is the responsibility of the doctor present on duty to ensure that all these three things are checked. Then the doctor is supposed to sign onto the cross match blood transfusion form and allow the transfusion. Then comes the step, this the blood received from the lab is at 4 degrees centigrade. It may have warmed up to 6 7 degrees centigrade by the time you see it, but still it is not at 37 degrees centigrade. And if you give cold blood immediately to the patient, it can cause hemolysis. So this blood first has to be warmed. There are uh, warming equipment which generally consists of a warm water bath where the blood bag is immersed and slowly warmed to room temperature. You don't need to warm it to 37 degrees centigrade, but so long as it doesn't feel cold to your cheek, it's good enough to start transfusion. Then you have to select a good site where you can see a big vein because blood is thicker than simple IV fluids. So you need a bigger cannula, 16, 18 gauge cannula generally, or at least 20 gauge cannula. And then you have to select the site, prepare the site, and then generally nowadays needles are not used to give transfusion. Teflon, foldable, bendable, flexible cannulas are used because transfusion may take anywhere from 2 hours to 4 hours, and you don't want in the middle of the transfusion for the needle to move or the patient to move and the needle to lose its location. Then you have to instruct the staff nurses on duty who are giving the actual transfusion about the rate of transfusion. Generally, what is done is that for the first 15 minutes, the transfusion is given slow, 5 drops per minute, and the patient's vital signs are observed for any sort of reaction. The reactions we will study now can be different sorts of reactions, but you have to first observe the patient for at least 15 minutes and see that there is no sort of any reaction, and only then you can go for a faster transfusion rate of anything from 20 to 60 drops per minute depending on the situation. Then there are complications of transfusions or transfusion reactions. First complication due to overload. Overload is that a patient already has a blood volume of 5 liters, but the patient has low hemoglobin and you're trying to correct that. So if you give one or two blood transfusions rapidly to this patient and the patient's heart is already compromised, the patient is already in heart failure, this heart cannot sustain the added volume of blood and the added venous return, and the congestive heart failure is uh, actually exacerbated. So this is one problem where in old age patients or ischemic heart disease or congestive heart failure patients, that you have to select the right blood product and the uh, correct rate of transfusion. Then there can be incompatibility hemolytic reactions. The recipient serum antibodies are incompatible with donor cells. That means that the cross match that was done was not done correctly, and the patient now has a major incompatibility hemolytic reaction. This is an emergency, and you need to treat it immediately, otherwise, the patient will go into renal failure. Then there are febrile reactions. Independent of the ABO or the RH antigens and their incompatibility reactions, the of the donor may contain some pyrogens, which, when they reach the recipient's body, may give rise to a febrile reaction. Then there can be certain antigens in the donor blood irrespective of independent of the ABO and RH, like we discussed about minor blood groups, and they can then cause an allergic reaction in the patient, and this all these three are emergencies, and the doctor on duty immediately needs to uh, treat the patient. The idea of giving slow transfusion for the first 15-20 minutes is this, that not enough antigen goes into the patient that it precipitates a severe reaction. We want to keep the reaction to the minimum. We just want to make sure that there is no reaction. Then, in severe reactions, there can be disseminated intravascular coagulation or DIC, and consumption coagulopathy of the clotting factors in the blood, and hemolysis. All these four reactions require immediate first aid treatment, otherwise, the patient is likely to have serious consequences. Then other problems or complications of transfusion, you may transmit infections which may be bacterial, HIV, you can transmit malarial parasites to the recipient, or hepatitis infection to the recipient. Rare chances, nowadays the system is much safer. And the possibility of air embolism is very rare. However, it may occur. Thrombophlebitis, as we know, is inflammation in the veins, and if there are minor reactions going on inside the vein with the uh, donor blood, then the vein may get inflamed and become painful and red. Then there is transfusion related acute lung injury. This is usually due to fresh frozen plasma, and again it is reactive response, allergic response to minor antigens in the plasma. So if your patient gets a transfusion reaction, what will happen? Patient will suddenly have fever. There will be a raised blood pressure and a wide pulse pressure. The systolic will be low or normal, and the diastolic will be low or normal, and the systolic will be very high, 160, 180, while the diastolic may be 90 or 60 or 70 or 80. So the difference between systolic and blood pressure increases a lot. The pulse becomes rapid, tachycardia. Patient may start having cold sweats, and the immediate treatment is twofold. You must give immediately IV antihistamines, and you must give IV steroids like solucortiv, hydrocortisone, to one, to prevent the allergic reaction from progressing, and to counter the um, effects of the cytokines and interleukin 6 that have already been released into the blood. Then immediately what you're supposed to do is you had already stopped the transfusion, but you don't throw away the blood bag. You not only check the documents and the forms for any error on your part or the staff's part, where the name of the patient, or there may be a mix up in the lab regarding the cross match. And if on paper everything seems fine, the donor blood is then sent back to the blood bank for rechecking as to the cause of this transfusion reaction. In case the reaction is very severe and the patient goes into disseminated intravascular coagulation, that will consume all the existing clotting factors in the blood of the recipient, and you have to replace at least the factors 2, 4, 8, and the platelets in a case of DIC, and these are replaced with fresh frozen plasma, cryoprecipitate, and platelet concentrates. Uh, in addition to giving blood to replace the destroyed hemoglobin, you have to give other blood products which will replace the clotting factors. Otherwise, the patient will start bleeding from different sides. So different types of blood products. There is autologous whole blood, patient's own blood taken over a 3 week period before the surgery and then transfused to the patient after the surgery or at the time of surgery. Then you can have packed RBCs, or in common terms what is called a red cell concentrate. This is generally a 330 ml bag, and it is usually used for uh, replacement of hemoglobin, especially in children and old age patients and congestive heart failure patients. And each red cell concentrate can transfer around 2 bags worth of hemoglobin in one reduced quantity bag. In chronic anemia, children and chronic congestive heart failure I have explained, but in chronic anemia, uh, hemoglobin loss is there, but there is no volume loss. The patient already has 5 liters of blood volume. It just contains less hemoglobin. So you don't want to give a lot of fluids. 450 ml plus 450 ml of a normal fresh blood would be 900 ml extra load into a chronic anemic patient, whereas a red cell concentrate will supply the same amount of hemoglobin with only 330 or one third the volume. So you have to know what to select. Platelet concentrates are indicated in thrombocytopenia if the count is less than 50 or the patient has started bleeding. In dengue fever, you may have seen that sometimes where patients remain stable even up to 10 into 10 raised to power 9 platelet count, and still they don't need a platelet transfusion. So this needs to be, but below 50, one needs to be ready to give platelet concentrate. Shelf life of platelets is around 5 days. So platelet concentrate needs to be prepared fresh. Then you can have fresh frozen plasma. This is centrifuge concentrated plasma from several different donors, and it is stored in frozen state at -40 to -50 degrees centigrade. It is rich in coagulation factors, and it is the first line therapy in coagulation disorders, DIC, and massive hemorrhage, where you given massive blood transfusions. You will need to add fresh frozen plasma to counter the deficiency of coagulation factors and inactivation by the anticoagulant in the donor blood bags. This fresh frozen plasma can be frozen and stored for up to 2 years. Then there are other blood products. Cryoprecipitate contains factor 8 and fibrinogen. It is used where factor 8 deficiency needs to be covered up. Human albumin 4.5%. It is rich in protein, usually given in hyperproteinemia stage, malnourishment, and sepsis. Prothrombin complex concentrates where prothrombin is being consumed, DIC, etc. Factor 8 in hemophiliacs. Factor 8 is deficient if these patients are going to undergo any surgery or have had an accident or trauma, then factor 8 needs to be replaced. Factor 9 deficiencies are seen in patients suffering from Christmas disease, and factor 9 Co9 is available to replace the deficiency. Fibrinogen itself is given in fibrinogen depletion. Fibrinogen is degraded in DIC and lost. Now we come to other IV fluids that can be used in surgery, and these are crystalloids and colloids. Crystalloids are generally low molecular weight particles, usually the isotonic with blood, and they are made isotonic with the addition of sodium or glucose and some other minerals, different in different products. Uh, these are inexpensive, not very costly, and however, they remain in circulation for a shorter time compared to colloids. They are much more safe as compared to colloids, and crystalloids are the transfusions that you normally see being carried out, infusions being carried out in the wards and in the ER. They are very effective for immediate fluid replacement. However, they get washed out of the system within the next 4 to 6 hours through urine. Uh, 0.9% sodium chloride is normal saline, normal because it is isotonic with the blood. 5% dextrose or 5% dextrose saline are other isotonic crystalloids. Then there is Ringer's lactate or Hartmann solution. These contain added potassium, calcium, and lactic acid. Then there is 10% dextrose water and 25% dextrose water, usually used in acute hypoglycemic, mm, hypoglycemic states. Then we come to colloids. These contain high molecular weight substances. They remain in circulation for a longer time because these colloid high molecular weight substances are not that easily passed through the glomerular filters. They're not filtered out like sodium or other minerals. However, on the one hand, their advantage is that they are more expensive in terms of replacing fluid volume. Uh, 500 ml would probably be good enough compared to 1 or 1.5 liters of a crystalloid. But these are, of course, more expensive. Uh, in the long term, they have not been shown to be superior to crystalloids for fluid expansion. However, they can be used in acute emergency blood loss situations to prevent the patient from going into irreversible hypovolemic shock. Hypovolemic shock. Emergency situations in the OT and the ER after acute blood loss. These are also less compared to crystalloids because they can, on the one hand, interfere with blood cross matching, and they can also induce reactions in the recipient. They are useful in patients who are unable to maintain plasma volume due to excess protein loss, for example, in major burns cases. Uh, Again, they are crystalloids are preferred, but they may be used where the patient is going into hypovolemic shock to give some time for the patient, sustenance to the patient, so, in which time you continue with crystalloids. Colloids, different types of colloids are human albumin, 4.5%. Then there are dextrans 40, dextran 70. Then you have starches and gelatins. All of these are high molecular weight compared to the normal crystalloid containing minerals. So, though they stay in the blood for longer periods and they hold the water because they of their colloidal pressure, they hold the water in the circulation. So good for replacement in acute emergency settings. With that, we come to the end of the lecture on blood products, blood transfusion, and intravenous fluids therapy. uh, See you next time with the 12th lecture, inshallah.